Hi, everybody. Welcome to your lecture about the paper. I know we already went over this portion of the paper in class, but I thought it might be prudent just to go ahead and review this as well one more time. That way you have me discussing it. If you don't have this form, if you didn't get one in class, if you weren't there that day, um, this paper is on Blackboard under course content, and you can print it out. This is not something you turn in, okay? So this is not the paper. I don't want this to be confusing because in the past I've had people just turn this in. This is your own record keeping, okay? It's supposed to be to take with you to the museum. Of course, if you hadn't gone to a museum and now we're dealing with this lockdown, you can use a website and you can still use this to record your facts, okay? So this is just for your note taking. It should be a 4-paragraph paper typed and sent to me in email, okay? All on its own. This portion of it, you don't turn into me. Okay, so let's start with the fact record. Each one of these facts introduced in your first paragraph is worth 10 points, okay? Artist, title, medium. You need all that in your introductory paragraph, all right? You need to pick the most dominant element of art. Now, sometimes people can, I've had people who adequately use more than one of these in this paragraph, but you're not supposed to use all of them. In fact, that's not a good thing to do. I've had people say, through line, space, shape, light, color, texture. No, don't do that, okay? You're going to want to pick one of these, all right? You're going to want to pick like light or space, and then explain how the artist used that and why it's the most dominant thing that's catching your attention. So if you pick color, you need to explain to me how the artist used color to the effect that, was successful. Or maybe they didn't succeed and you want to talk about how you think the painting failed. I think that'd be harder to choose a painting you don't like, but you certainly could. Either way, you need to pick what jumps out the first thing. And we're going to talk about that in the actual lecture in a minute. I'm going to have examples for all these things, okay? You're going to identify that. That's worth 30 points. Now, out of these 30 possible points, if something is amiss, like if it's a very confusing paragraph, if it doesn't really explain anything, you can be docked points out of this for clarity, okay? So make sure that you're really identifying your most dominant element here and you're explaining how the artist did it, okay? Same thing here with principle of design, worth 30 points. You're going to pick one of these things and you're going to identify the most prominent one in the piece you choose, okay? And you're going to explain why and how it's used. All right, if you introduce an element or principle, you have to explain how the artist used it. It can't just be there. It can't just be like the artist uses repetition and rhythm, I've had people say it's a pattern, and then they just leave it at that. Well, what is a pattern? We need to know what the pattern is. A pattern is repeating shapes, right? So tell me what a pattern is and how the painting is a pattern. How and why, all right? So 4 short paragraphs are enough. I do require at least 4 sentences in a paragraph, or else your paper, if you do, 2-sentence paragraphs, that your paper is going to be tiny, and it's really just not enough. It's really just not enough writing to explain these concepts, okay? So you need to at least have a 4-paragraph, or 4-sentence paragraph for each one of your 4 paragraphs, all right? Use complete sentences. Introduce your artwork with the above facts cited in the first paragraph. Use quotations or italicize the title each time it's used. I prefer italics, guys. I'm not going to dock you if you use quotations, but I prefer italics just because that's usually how it's done in the art world. For some reason, paintings' titles are always italicized. All right, so specifically name and explain clearly how the element of art, 2nd paragraph, and the principle of design, 3rd paragraph, are used in a dominant manner in the artwork. Your original and personal interpretation of the artwork meaning is required in the 4th and concluding paragraph. It can be either positive or negative. I always tell you guys, you don't have to like anything that you pick, all right? You don't have to like any artwork we talk about. We're just trying to figure out what's at play in the art, okay? I'm not trying to sell you on anything. So proof your work for grammar, spelling, and capitalization. This is up to 30 points off. I've said this before. If you want to send your paper to me early, if you are somebody who struggles with paper writing, that's common. That's okay. You can send it to me, and I'll give you some suggested revisions and things like that. You can do an extra credit sketch, okay? Now, this says all of this must be sent as an attachment in course messages. This is not what I would like. I would like for you guys just to email me your papers, and you can email me images of the sketch for an extra 5 points. I recommend doing this. You don't have to, it's not mandatory, but you got to think this can be the difference between a passing and failing paper. And this paper is worth 25% of your grade. So please take it seriously, because it can take your grade from a perfect score to a failing score pretty easily. So let's see, or not a perfect score, but a good score. So the other thing I want to say, this is not a research paper. So now that we are doing this online especially, it is really easy to accidentally plagiarize information. And if your paper is heavily laden with plagiarism, you have to redo it. So just don't do that to yourself. It's not a research paper. It's conceptual. It should be coming from your own brain, okay? That's why we spend all this time talking about this. We're preparing to be able to understand how to dissect a piece and figure out what it's all about, okay? That's something that you should be doing from your brain. Obviously, you're going to get the facts here from the website. So that's okay. That's how you should do that. But big chunks of information should not come from the website. If you see a particular quote you want to use, you can put it in quotations and cite it. And this paper should be in MLA format, okay? Should have your name on it, should have your class on it, your class number. So you're either 100, 100, 100, 101, or 100, 102 that says what you are on Blackboard. So put that on your paper, the date, your name, everything you would put in MLA format. All right. And yeah, it shouldn't be a research paper. You really shouldn't need any citations, okay? It should be you just dissecting this piece of art, all right? Because it is easy to accidentally plagiarize a paper, and I just want you guys to be aware of that. So now let's look at an example for each one of these elements of art and principles of design. All right, so the elements of art again are as follows: line, space, shape, light, color, texture, pattern, time, and motion. We're going to go through an example for each one of these things being the most dominant in a work of art. Okay, so this is an example of line as the dominant element of art. Van Gogh's style in Starry Night was new and exciting. Much of the reason why was due to his use of short, unblended lines. So Van Gogh was not doing exceptionally well in the art scene until he started this style. It's a signature style of Van Gogh's, these little lines. Now, could you successfully argue a different element of art? Yeah, you could. You could argue warm and cool colors, and then you could say emphasis and focal point for your principle here. So you could say that this is emphasized by warm light. So you could do warm colors against cool colors. That could be your dominant. You could do color there. But I think the most dominant thing here is the use of line, okay? And I think that would pair really well with rhythm, all right? So short, unblended lines. Van Gogh uses that in a signature effect here. He really sells his signature style here with these short, unblended lines. It makes the painting look rhythmic. It makes the painting look flowing and magical. All right. So, an example of space as the dominant element of art. Matisse uses positive and negative space in this cut paper work. The shapes are made by what is both added, positive space, and what is left out, negative space. Now, we talked about this work in class, this Matisse work, Henri Matisse, and how these areas of negative space are really interesting because they are really the emphasized subject matter here, right? So the negative space here is used in a really interesting and unique way. So you could say that Matisse kind of flips the positive and negative ideals on its head by making the negative space the most prominent element in his work. Okay. Jacob Lawrence is the shoemaker. You guys probably will remember the shoemaker. We talked about the shoemaker in class when we did our Harlem Renaissance Day. Jacob Lawrence uses bright colors and geometric shapes to achieve the look of the shoemaker. The shape is by far the most dominant element of art in this piece. So it's not that the color isn't attention grabbing, and it's not that you couldn't argue, these really bright, unmixed tube colors, these primary colors. You could talk about that. But shape is most dominant here, okay? And what I think is very interesting is that Jacob Lawrence also uses scale here. The shoemaker himself is very large. He's very dominant here, right? Especially his hands. And we know that this painting is about a working man. This is about a man with a noble working job, a craftsman. And his hands are this large scale here, probably to emphasize the point that he's a working man. Okay, so if you were going to go down here to your principles of design, you would probably want to pair scale and proportion with shape. So you would talk about how Jacob Lawrence uses geometric shapes, how a human being is usually depicted in these organic, natural shapes, but here Jacob Lawrence has achieved his style by making everything very geometric, right? And then you might pair it in your next paragraph with scale and proportion, talk about how large the figure is, how large the figure's hands are, and that his hands are probably enlarged to emphasize how important his role is in his job. Okay, and that's also here with the title, the shoemaker. He is the focal point. You could also, when you talk about emphasizing a focal point, you could also talk about how he himself is the focal point and all the different ways he's emphasized if you choose to do emphasis and focal point. Now, if you chose to do emphasis and focal point here, you would say that maybe he's scaling this figure up to be emphasized. An example of light as the dominant element of art. Caravaggio uses tenebrism, extreme dark areas contrasted against extreme light areas, to achieve a staggering amount of light in his work. And I would say that if you were going to, you're going to kind of want to go into your next paragraph with the point you make in your second paragraph. So your element is going to pair usually with one of those principles in a very natural way. I'm talking about Caravaggio here. This use of light emphasizes these focal points, doesn't it? Her face is really a focal point because of how bright light is hitting it. If I was going to choose this piece and talk about light in my paragraph, I would say something like, Caravaggio uses light to draw attention to the areas of the painting that he probably most wanted to be seen. So this figure here's face, this figure here's arm, right? The bright tip of the sword. These are things that are being emphasized by the light, so talk about that. And then you could talk about emphasis and focal point in your principal paragraph. And you would say that he is emphasizing certain areas with use of light. Now, what's the most dominant focal point? And this one, I would have to say he gets me first, right? And we think about that Fibonacci spiral, right? And you can see he would be in the large part of the spiral. I think he's getting me. And then I think there's also an implied line here between her face and his face. So the action of what he's being beheaded. This is a scene from the Bible, right? He's being beheaded. There's an implied line. So you could also do implied line. Implied line's a tough one, though. If you're going to do line, implied line is probably one of the harder ones, but it is there. There's a diagonal line that carries us through this piece because of the way the figures' heads are pointed towards one another. All right, so an example of color is the dominant element of art. Vasily Kandinsky uses bright, almost forceful color in autumn landscape with boats. Note the title and that this piece is set in autumn. So color is clearly used in a non-realistic, expressive way. This doesn't really look like autumn. The way the colors are used is not realistic, and that's why it's so dominant, There's not a great harmony here. There's a lot of dissonance, meaning the colors clash, and in a lot of ways it's not super concerned with color theory, although maybe there are some placements, right, that are that you could argue. You could argue that this reflection is green and this boat is red, which a red boat is not usually going to cause this kind of green reflection. So again, this is an expressive color, meaning it's not meant to be realistic. It's meant to express the artist's inner self. So important, most famous artists use color as well as other dominant elements in their painting. Someone like Picasso used shape to great effect, but also color. You're welcome to discuss both, but it's not necessary. It's not mandatory, okay? You can talk about both. If you do the Shoemaker, you can talk about shape and color, okay? And again, this is, go back a second to Shoemaker. You are welcome to talk about both shape and color here, but you don't have to. And you don't want to do both at the detriment of one or the other, okay? Because they need to be clearly explained. If you introduce a element, you need to explain how the artist is using it, okay? Why are they using it? Do you think? Just you're playing detective. But you can't just introduce them and not explain them. They have to be explained, okay? Texture as a dominant element of art. Contemporary artist Anna Maria Adolescu works with palette knife to create heavily textured impasto oil paintings. The most noticeable thing in her work is texture. It's going to be the thing that grabs you first, okay? Again, could we talk about color? We certainly could. You certainly could choose color, and color is very dominant here, too. So you wouldn't be wrong if you talked about warm and cool colors and, emphasizing that the sun's going down with these cool colors starting to set in, and, the sun is clearly lowering. You could definitely talk about that. But texture is used here to create a style. There's a style happening here that's unique to this painting, and it takes some of the realism away from the sky, doesn't it? To have this thick, because the sky is very fluffy and smooth, and here we have this very thick texture. So we could talk about how Anna creates her own style here, okay, using texture. How does she use it? Well, you would talk about how she uses it in this very impasto, thick layering way in the painting. Why? Probably to create a sense of style here, okay? Pattern as a dominant element of art. Modern artist Bruce Gray uses a complicated pattern to great effect in Raindrops No. 4. Patterns are shapes, colors, and designs that repeat in a work. So if you choose pattern, it's easy to want to just say, Bruce Gray uses pattern, because you guys have heard that phrase enough that you take it for granted that everyone knows what you're talking about. And they probably do, okay? But it's different when we're discussing a piece of art. It's just, you need to explain maybe what a pattern is. So you could say, well, patterns are shapes or colors or designs that repeat. And the way Bruce Gray does this is to repeat these circular shapes, and they create the pattern. Okay, so talk about how the pattern is created with these circles. And the repeating colors like red and yellow. You would describe those things. Bruce Gray is achieving a pattern effect, pattern being repeating shapes, colors, and designs, by repeating the circular shape and the color yellow, red, teal. You want to talk about what's being repeated, what colors are being repeated, what shapes are being repeated, and what a pattern really is, because you want to assume that your audience doesn't really know what you're talking about. You also have to assume they don't know what you're talking about, because they don't. They're not looking at the painting you're looking at. So you have to take it for granted that you have to draw an image of that painting or sculpture or drawing, whatever you pick, in the eye of the reader without having seen it, okay? All right, so time and motion as an element of art. It's a bit more complicated to identify. We've talked about time and motion in class. When an artwork shows the passage of time or more motion than a static work. Salvador Dali achieves both in persistence of memory. The melting of the clocks and landscape show the passage of time. The clock sliding from the table shows motion. So we could describe time and motion as more of a narrative painting, but I think the easiest way to understand that a narration is happening is just to look for indications that time has passed and that things are in motion, okay? Just look for the two things that are being described in time and motion, and you're usually going to find a narrative painting. Somebody walking down the street as the sun sets. Well, sunset implies that time is passing and the walking is motion, okay? So the antithesis to a painting that's full of time and motion might be something very static, like a still life of apples and bananas and oranges, okay? Unless they're rotten, which would show the passage of time, and one of those apples is rolling on the table, which would show the, presence of motion, then it's not. It's very static. It's the antithesis of time and motion. So, a short interlude for thesis discussions. So, some people, struggle a lot with how to set up a paper. A paper can be done very easily by just setting up an introductory thesis, okay? And then you have your whole paper laid out for you in that first paragraph. So according to your paper, your first paragraph should indicate the facts of your chosen artwork. This would include the title, artist name, and media used to make it. It might help to set up a thesis as well. To explain this, I'm going to use Starry Night as an example. A thesis sentence should be in parts equal to your coming paragraph and correspond to those paragraphs. Your second paragraph should be about the dominant element of art. The third should be about the dominant principle of design, and the fourth final paragraph should conclude the paper and state your opinion. Your opinion should only come into play in this final paragraph. It's not that your opinions don't matter, guys. This is just the way you discuss art academically. We're trying to play detective to figure out what the artist was trying to do and what the painting ultimately means by parsing out all of these little clues, right? So it's not that your opinion doesn't matter. It's just that we don't necessarily know our opinion until we know what the painting's about. And sometimes it's hard to dissect what a painting's about. So here's an example thesis, okay? Van Gogh's The Starry Night uses line to great effect. Through use of a calming rhythm, he guides our eye to the focal point of the bright, warm moon. The painting overall is a great show of hope and comfort. So your thesis sentence should come at the end of your first paragraph, generally, or it can be your first paragraph. Your first paragraph can be a thesis paragraph and set up the paper. So when I say that it should set it up, The Starry Night uses line to great effect. Well, there's your first paragraph. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is your first paragraph here. This is actually your second paragraph. Your first paragraph is going to be Van Gogh's The Starry Night, and you're going to say the medium, oil and canvas. And then you're setting up that element of art paragraph. Uses line to great effect. Well, that's your second paragraph, element of art. Through use of a calming rhythm, he guides our eye to the focal point of the bright, warm moon. Well, that's your third paragraph. That's your principle in design, talking about rhythm and how rhythm is used to guide your eye to a focal point of a bright, warm moon. The painting overall is a great show of hope and comfort. That's the opinion part. You feel that this way about the painting, in theory, okay? Just this example. So a good thesis should set up every paragraph. And then all you have to do is look to your thesis to know what you're doing next. First paragraph is going to be the facts. Second paragraph is going to be about the element of art, okay? So line, calming rhythm, he guides our eye to the focal point of the bright, warm moon. That's your principle and how it's used. The painting overall is a great show of hope and comfort. That is your opinion. All right, so what are the principles of design? The principles of design are balance, emphasis and focal point, scale and proportion, repetition and rhythm, and unity and variety. So balance is the dominant principle of design. All right, so balance in art means visual distribution of weight. Here, Frida Kahlo balances the visual weight perfectly by having a full seated figure on each side of the painting. And I always want to think about what we would pair these with. So we talked about that a little when we were talking about the element of art. So in the principle of design, what would we pair balance with? I think you could pair this with line, right? This is a very solid, sturdy painting, meaning there are vertical line setups and there are horizontal line setup, even this connective line between one to the other. Everything's on kind of a vertical and horizontal grid, isn't it? We've got this back here, this horizon line, very, very horizontal and straight. The figures are very vertical, and because they're so evenly weighted, everything in this painting is balanced very well, okay? So if you're explaining the balance here, you would say that Frida Kahlo is balancing the visual weight extremely evenly by having two figures of the exact same size, okay? Oh, and you guys will remember this one. We talked about it quite a bit in class. This surreal Vladimir Kush painting is the epitome of emphasis on a focal point. Vladimir used this shocking orange for the candle flame against the blue of the sky, and remember, warm colors jump forward against cool colors, to draw the eye to the center of the painting. After doing so, we're led to a starkly dark figure. Other methods to draw the eye inward are used as well. These include the lines drawing toward the center, the light rays, and the framing of the clouds. So we talked about this, right? You could go so many directions with this painting, but it's definitely emphasizing its focal point, okay? So if you were doing this painting in your first, I keep saying first, I mean second, I'm sorry about that, guys. Your second paragraph, that's the emphasis, you could really pick a lot of things. You could pick line for the light rays. You could pick color and talk about the warm and cool. But at the end of the day, this is definitely an emphasized focal point, okay? Her value is darker than anything around her. She is encircled by the clouds. She pretty much has a neon arrow pointing at her because of all these lines, right? So she's very emphasized here. That's what we want to know, how the artist emphasizes. All right, scale and proportion as the dominant principle of design. Mark Rothko used scale to great effect in his color field paintings. The scale of these works helped the viewer to see color in a new way. Proportion, when used for emphasis, would be done through manipulating natural proportions to make a point. For example, someone known to have a massive ego might have a disproportionately large head. With Mark Rothko, who did these gigantic, this is the Rothko Temple. It's designed like a church. It's his personal museum. He's got just the scale really going on here, okay? And when we talk about something being dominant, if we were talking about the element to choose here, it would be color, right? That's all they are. They're color. They're called color field paintings. So this would be quite an obvious one, wouldn't it, for the element of art? It'd be color, and it would be paired with scale. So you're going to think about which two pair the best. Repetition and rhythm as the dominant principle of design. Andy Warhol frequently used repetition and did so here in his Marilyn Monroe diptych portraits, okay? Diptych portraits, okay. Repetition. She repeats over and over again, and that creates this sense of rhythm throughout the painting. Repetition, same as in music. It creates a rhythm in art, all right? And you could definitely choose repetition and rhythm to pair with the lines in Starry Night, right? It's a soft rhythm, like a slow song. The waving lines create a soft rhythm, but the lines are repetitious, aren't they? They're repeating. These little lines are repeating all throughout the sky, and the same colors are repeating all throughout the sky. But because of the languishing nature of the lines, we're creating a slow rhythm. All right. Another example of rhythm, the variations in the pattern in Piet Mondrian's Broadway Boogie Woogie creates a rhythm within the piece. So this is a very almost like staccato kind of rhythm, that dot, 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 right? Because we have these small little squares repeating throughout Broadway Boogie Woogie, and these were based on the grids of New York City. So it's that kind of rhythm of a city. Okay. Unity and variety. This is Kandinsky's squares and concentric circles, and it's a perfect example of unity and variety. By using similar shapes and colors, Kandinsky unifies the piece. By making them all slightly different, he gives the piece variety. So unity and variety is when you have something that has a repetition occurring at the piece, but there's enough variety to keep it a little different, right? So here we have unity created by these repeating circles and by the repeating squares, but every circle is kind of a different shape, and there are different colors at play throughout this. They're not all the same color, they're not all the same shape, even though they're circles. Some are kind of smushed and some are kind of different. So that's how you get unity and variety, okay? And that's different here than if we look here and talk about repetition, rhythm again. The repetition here is not very varied. It's not varied much at all. There's pretty much just repetition, and that repetition creates kind of a quick rhythm, all right? So, what would you pair this with as your element? you would perhaps pair this with, I would think, color and talk about dissonance. Warhol, you're almost always, if you choose a Warhol painting, it's almost always going to be color as the dominant element of art. He uses dissonant colors, meaning they don't fit a specific color harmony. All right. So let's see. What would we pair this with as our element? Would probably pair this with either shape or line, right? I think shape or line would be very solid here. Obviously, it's full of squares. So that's used to this kind of modern effect, right? But there's also very strict guideline grids here for horizontal and vertical lines. All right, so it's on a grid. And here, I would say we could also talk about dissonance and color, or you could pick shape. Shape would be a very good one to lead into talking about unity and variety, wouldn't it? We talk about the circles and the squares and how there's repetition here, but the repetition really leads to unity and variety because of the differences. All right. So what I'm going to have you guys to do. Oh, also you could pick pattern. Yeah, you could pick pattern for this too. Just have that thought real quick. You could definitely pick pattern for either this Broadway Boogie Woogie or this Kandinsky painting. Pattern would really work well, and pattern almost always is going to pair with rhythm, repetition and rhythm, unity and variety. That's always going to usually pair with pattern. Okay, so some of these just naturally pair together. What I want you guys to do for the discussion board, and these things will be written out for you as well. I'm definitely going to write out what you're going to do in each discussion board coming up. You need to pick a painting online and write a short paragraph in the discussion board talking about what you think is the most dominant element of art and the most dominant principle of design in the painting you choose, okay? I know we're having a little bit of trouble with people uploading images. I keep getting movie files, which just load blank movies, like just little video boxes that don't load, and also keep getting HEIC files. I can't see them, guys, and I can't grade them if I can't see them. So I've tried to reach out to some of you, and if you can, please get back with me because I can't enter a grade for you unless I can see your piece. So what I'm going to say is if you are struggling to upload your images for these coming boards, then just link to a Google image. You just copy and paste a link and I can click it. That'd be okay too. Or you can save it and upload it as a JPEG in the discussion board. But I want you guys to briefly talk about what you think the most dominant element of art is in the painting you choose and what you think the most dominant principle of design is. Also, if you're still struggling with, what to do in your paper, there is a question board set up for all questions. Email's fine, but it really helps to ask the questions publicly where everybody can see them because I'm sure you all have a lot of similar questions. So don't be shy to post in the question board, okay? Hope you're all doing good. I hope you're all well. I hope your families are all well. And I will be back soon with another lecture. Bye, guys.